Hey, deserving listeners, Love is Blind. Let's watch and see what comes flying out of my face.
Yeah.
I'm more anxious. I feel like I'm not good enough, and so I want you to show me that, yes, you care about.
2 thumbs up. Wow. Chills. Great. So he's looked into it, and he knows that he has more anxious attachment, and that results in him feeling, or as a part of that, he doesn't feel like he deserves. How did he word?
More anxious. I feel like I'm not good enough, and I need frequent indicators that I am good enough and that I am in a secure relationship. Maybe a little bit of a trigger for me, because past relationships I dealt with that, but like on the extreme end of it.
Yeah.
I'm more anxious. I feel like I'm not good enough, and so I want you to show me that, yes, you care about me and that you are not abandoning me.
Yeah.
And for you, it's like, let me get a.
Yeah, wow. Just, wow. It doesn't fix the problem. It doesn't mean that both of them won't have problems, but it means that they know the issue. They know the landscape. They have a map to navigate things moving forward, a way of interpreting things for themselves. And both of them, yeah, 2 big thumbs up. And it makes me sad because they didn't choose to have this attachment. No one chooses their attachment. Secure people don't choose to have their attachment style. They both went through a lot of difficulty. With Alex, he was relentlessly bullied, according to what he was saying. And he said that he was kicked out of his house. He had to figure things out on his own. And he says it was brutal. So yeah, I guess we haven't heard much about his early childhood, but oof, yeah. But yeah, great. I wonder if we'll see more of this moving forward as people learn about attachment styles, because it would absolutely be relevant. That's what I'd be asking about if I were in the pods.
Care about me and that you are not abandoning me.
Yeah.
And for you, it's like, let me get away and be on my own, because I don't need you to show me that I'm good enough.
I mean, the way he words it is interesting. It's from the anxious or preoccupied bias. He's saying, yeah, and for you, you would move away because you don't need me to show you that you're good enough. And yeah, but there's another way to put it, but that's through his lens.
Yeah.
I think that could lead to some issues. I don't know.
Obviously, I never want to make you feel anxious. It's not even on the radar. Ultimately, that's what I've noticed in myself. I've recognized those patterns. Just for some context, I think I told you my mom's a drug addict.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was 12 years old.
Just a fantastic conversation. Usually we don't get anything along these lines, and we're just left wondering, what's going on there? So I really want to commend. It is interesting. It's notable that when he was talking about his concern and the trigger, and she responded well, saying, I would never want to make you feel anxious. As a couple therapist, I have this impulse to say, oh, let's pause on that. Let's really talk about that. What do you typically get triggered by, Alex, and what triggers you? Because that's the thing in this configuration, the preoccupied, anxious, and the avoidant, dismissive, is the Alexes of the world will give more signals and have seemingly more symptoms of the problems in the relationship. In fact, often the preoccupied, anxious person will think of themselves as the problem, but they're just a lightning rod for the distance in the relationship. They're the ones that will say, sometimes they will say there's distance and problems when there isn't, right? But when the avoidant person will either avoid just in their mind, or they'll run. So they're very unlikely to say, hey, I don't like this, let's work on it, or stop it. If it gets to that point, before running, they will just avoid in their mind, or drink or marijuana or some other activity, or just spend more time by themselves, or they'll run. So the avoidant, dismissive person will not look like a problem because they don't alert anything, but there are problems, you know? And sometimes the preoccupied, anxious person, their behavior is just so erratic and outwardly emotional and upsetting that anything that this person does, this person just eclipses it with how active they are. But anyway, so I would want more talk around it, because I guess I have hopes for this relationship, but I'm guessing that they're not going to get that opportunity. But they have a huge leg up on other cast members in that they can identify it. There are probably a fair amount of cast members that would be characterized as having secure attachment. And by the way, having secure attachment does not mean you don't have problems. That's double negative. People with secure attachment have problems in their relationships and marriages. When we study large groups of people, they tend to do better in relationships. They tend to have more relationship satisfaction. Their marriages tend to stay together. There's less abuse and problems. Their parenting tends to work out better. But that's not across the board, of course. There's a lot of variability. The reason why I say this is because there's this notion that I see people will say, I'm avoidant, and they'll contrast them with what they think to be securely attached individuals, and that they have no problems. Everything's fine. Everything's great. They trust everyone. They never make a mistake. That's just not true. When they're faced with distance and they get hurt, depending on their self-awareness and their differentiation, the amount of therapy they've been through, securely attached people tend to, on average, trust a little bit more. That's kind of the big key, is that they tend to give the benefit of the doubt to the other person. They're being treated poorly, or there's a distant vibe in a spousal relationship, and the securely attached person will just baseline neurologically figure, well, it'll get better, or they don't hate me, they must be having a bad day, or they only are kind of bothered with me right now, which doesn't feel good, but we'll get through this. I don't know how, but something will turn this around. Securely attached individuals have that trust because of the way that they are raised, because repeatedly over thousands of instances from the age of 0 to 5, that's what happened on average. For insecurely attached individuals, that was not the case. So they don't trust, and they don't give the benefit of the doubt. And due to projective identification, they might actually attract people who are more likely to have concerning problems. But anyway, so for the avoidant person, because they don't trust, they run it before it ever comes to a question, before their mistrust is demonstrated to be warranted. They would rather run because it's just safer that way. For the preoccupied person, they don't trust, as what he was saying, and they need more frequent communication around their lack of being abandoned, right? Whereas securely attached people also worry about abandonment. They're also hurt by things and overreact to things. But baseline, they just trust that the other person loves them. They loved me last month. In a long-term relationship, sometimes you have a bad month. Sometimes you have a bad year. Securely attached people have the trust like, well, things will work out, and I know that they have good thoughts towards me. I haven't heard anything lately. I would like to hear some things, and if I don't start hearing some things soon, I don't know how long I can take this. But they're more resilient because of this innate sense that they're lovable. Even the way he's wording it shows that he understands some of the nuances of attachment. He says that he doesn't believe he's good enough. And that is an important element of attachment style. It doesn't always exactly line up, but so just a little bit on this, that in attachment theory, there are, John Bowlby and others put forth this notion of working models. And there are some simplistic ways of understanding and some elaborate ways. I often use the elaborate way of talking about it, but to put it simply, our experiences will teach us a working model of self and a working model of others. And to put it very succinct or very simplistically, for some people, they conclude, based on the way they're being treated and partially just their own way of evaluating what's happening around them, because they're a part of the equation, their own decisions about, it's hard to imagine a 2-year-old or a 12-month-old making decisions about how to interpret their worth in the world, but they do. We see it all the time. Anyway, so
they develop a working, so for some people, because they're being mistreated, they will develop a working model that others are good and I am bad. It's a very simplistic way of putting it. Young children are very black and white, so it literally can be that way. Or they're being mistreated and they conclude, other people are bad, I'm good. Other people, if they're severely mistreated, will conclude, other people are bad and I am bad. Other people that are treated relatively well will conclude, other people are good and I am good. Again, it's oversimplification. So for the good, that's secure. For the others are good, I'm bad, that's preoccupied, anxious. For people who conclude other people are bad, I am good, that is avoidant. It's on the spectrum of narcissism, I'm good, and if I really need to be good, then I'm superior, that kind of thing. And then if other people are bad and I am bad, that is disorganized or fearful. It doesn't always exactly line up like this, and one's working model in terms of the conscious and preconscious can be different from your unconscious, and it can be more nuanced anyway, but you get the picture. So he's identifying that. He's identifying that way of talking about attachment style of other people are good, I am bad, and I need that constant reassurance that I'm good enough and that people aren't going to abandon me. So as a part of the recovery from insecure attachment is to evaluate that working model. And the working model affects all sorts of things. It affects like the way that you just not only see goodness and badness, but also like what you expect from other people and what sort of self-esteems you might have and what sort of areas you feel worthy. Because it's all, the working model isn't just a good or bad thing. It's elaborate in terms of like, how do I see me? How do I see others, generally speaking? Anyway, and you can have working models of like relationships of dyads in addition, which isn't a part of attachment theory. But anyway, I'll stop yammering. But the corrective experiences are that you need are determined by understanding what the deficits are and what the trauma is. So if for him, for example, the corrective experience that would in all likelihood reduce his need to be constantly reassured that he's not going to be abandoned is to have experiences that teach him that he is worthy. That baseline, regardless of how anyone treats him, regardless of anything that he does, really, he is inherently good and lovable and likable and attachable and, listened toable, right? Worthy of having feelings, all that kind of stuff. He can believe that intellectually, but deep down he doesn't believe it because of the way he was treated, which causes the anxious attachment. So if you have that corrective experience, if you know what you need, and then you can engineer that corrective experience, the reason why you often need to engineer it is because the defenses against the pain in the future will prevent you from ever, like for her corrective experience is she needs to have a secure relationship that is long-term and deep and vulnerable, where she is vulnerable and open and risks being rejected by opening up, and that relationship is 100% secure and would never harm her and would always stick with her, never leave her, okay? But it's catch-22. How can she have that experience if as soon as she barely opens up and there's a weird vibe as she puts it, she runs, right? She'll never get that now. She has to engineer it. She has to push past. That's where therapy comes in. Therapists and clients can work together on this. It can become a conscious thing. So the client can come in to a session and say, I am feeling anxious about how close I am to you. And we've already talked, and you predicted this would happen, therapist. So let's talk about it. And the therapist, can slow things down or talk about it or reassure in a very overt way, that kind of stuff. That's the kind of work that I do.
Because I don't need you to show me that I'm good enough.
Yeah.
I think that could lead to some issues. I don't know.
Obviously, I never want to make you feel anxious. It's not even on the radar.
So I didn't catch that the first time, and I don't know what she means by that, but watching it a second time, it's possible she is saying, I don't want to make you anxious. In fact, I don't even think I would notice if you were anxious because I don't pay attention to that kind of thing because I tend to be more standoffish or distant or something. I think that's what she's saying. The first time I saw that, I think I interpreted it as her saying, honestly, it's not even on my radar. I thought she was saying that I would never make you feel anxious.
it's not even really my tendency to do that to people, so I wouldn't worry about that. I don't know which one it was. I don't know if we'll find out. What do you think? It could be another thing.
Ultimately, that's what I've noticed in myself. I've recognized those patterns. Just for like some context, I think I told you like my mom's a drug addict.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was like 12 years old, my stepdad had like taken too many pills or something. And I had to make sure that he was like still breathing on my birthday. But that was like my norm.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. And I'm going to take a guess and say that her parents were abused growing up, severely traumatized. That's typically the case when it comes to drug addiction like this, is self-medicating the pain and lack of access to any other treatment or coping mechanism. Drug addiction, misuse of substances typically begins, whether people are conscious of this or not, with the experience of using a substance and for the first time or in a rare instance feeling relaxed. People will report this when it comes to abusing opiates, that the first time they were prescribed medication for their wisdom teeth being pulled out or something, they are prescribed a med, they take it, and all of a sudden, for the very first time in their life, they feel okay. And the way that they think everyone else feels, where they don't have this constant feeling of dread and terror and fear and worthlessness and concern. They're just like, because the substance takes away the pain, but it also numbs a lot of things, right? And obviously they like that feeling. They like the feeling of euphoria, but they also like the absence of the constant buzz of horror that they're feeling. And they start to use more and more. You need more to have the effect due to tolerance. You start using so much that there are negative consequences to your life, whether it be financially or occupationally or relationally or health-wise or whatever. That gives you more reason to hate yourself and be ashamed, which means you need more substance to cover that up. And eventually your parenting is going to be affected. Contrary to what you would want to do, you end up neglecting your kids, maybe abusing your kids. So it's a cycle of difficulty. She has talked about, I don't think I included it, how she has, for the most part, ended the chain of trauma. She said this, that the way that she sees what she went through with her parents as a child herself was that she was just the result of a long-standing transgenerational pattern of trauma, meaning that she either knows or highly suspects that her parents were abusive or harmful in some way, and their parents, because that is typically the case. And she says that she has broken that chain. She is still working on some things, she said, but she has, for the most part, not engaged in that transgenerational pattern, meaning that she doesn't suffer from addiction and doesn't have young children, because she was talking about how her parents are pretty young when they had her. So, that's all that any of us can expect to achieve is to improve on the model. If we end up having some problems with our parenting, well, what do I say? I would say that parents should be proud of themselves if their kids had to go through a lot less therapy to cope with their parenting than they had to go through the therapy with their parents. Does that make sense? That's a funny way of putting it, but I think it's kind of generally the way. I say all this because as a parent, you can't do things perfectly. In fact, that's almost, I feel like I should go further and say that, of course, you're not going to be perfect, and you're going to screw things up regularly. But to what degree? And what should we expect from people given the level that they went through growing up, right? We're responsible for self-awareness and working on things in our own therapy, engaging whether or not we're suited for parenting and making sure our life, doing what we can. But there's only so much you can do in a life. You can be in therapy, if you listen to my audio podcast,
with Bob, my best friend therapist. He talks about how he's been in therapy for 35 years or longer in earnest, like really intense therapy for many years. And he still struggles all the time. And the problems that he originally went into therapy for, one could say he's halfway down the road, maybe. That's just unfortunately how things work out. What's the expectation? That's what I'm saying, is to be realistic about things and to maybe let people off the hook. Because, for some parents, that shame is what causes them to suffer more and maybe not be available to their kids or use substances to cover it up,
So I wrote them this letter and I was just like, it's either drugs or it's me. And they didn't choose me.
Wow.
Yeah, I would have predicted that. It's not that the parents didn't want to choose her over the drugs, but they, by that point, had learned that it's not possible. And also, they could have been down a road of denial, which develops, people who develop substance abuse and down the line eventually are in complete denial. They don't wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to be in denial and be a bad parent so I can use all the drugs I want because I want my cake and eat it too. It's not how things work. They deep down know that they have a problem. They have tried or are trying to kick it. A very typical cycle that will happen is the individual traumatized severely, take substance. Oh my God, I feel okay. Keep it under control. Go down the road. Be functional about it. Don't overuse. Do just enough so that you can get through the day. That's impossible to sustain over time. Life starts to fall apart. You need more substances to cope. You have to be laser focused on the substance. People start to suggest that you shouldn't use, and you maybe even agree. Maybe even internally, you start to say, "Why am I using this all the time?" You try to cut back. And not only do all the withdrawal symptoms kick in, which are intense for things like opiates, opioids, and alcohol and cigarettes, just all the substances, even for marijuana, depending, there can be a fair amount of withdrawal symptoms anyway. And it's no joke, and it's highly motivating, especially when all you got to do is just use, and that intense feeling will go away. And withdrawal symptoms, I think most people have seen the scenes in a movie or a TV show where someone's shaking and has all the sweat and that can happen with some substances. But withdrawal symptoms can also manifest in just a general malaise, just feeling like, I just don't feel myself. And you take the substance and you just, that malaise is gone. Because the body is, there's certain neurotransmitters that are down-regulating and up-regulating, and certain motivational circuits that are trying to push you. Anyway, I won't bore you with the details, but it can be subtler than that. Anyway, so they run into that, but they also run into their trauma flooding back. And they have no way of coping with it. And that can be intense, right? The substance and not only the substance neurologically, but the routines and the ceremonies around the substance, whether it's the cooking and what, but also just the obtaining of it, the thinking of it. It occupies the brain severely, right? It focuses the brain, and you can't focus on your trauma. The trauma doesn't have a way in when you're focusing on that all the time. And so when a kid in this extremely tragic result, she gets to this point where she's like, look, either you get sober or I'm gone. Choose, do you want me as your daughter or do you want your drugs? And I get that. And, that might have been a wonderfully healthy thing for her to get to, given what was happening. And I sympathize with the parents. It's horrible what the parents did to her. And if we had a different society that had more education, more services, a variety of services, not just abstinence, but also harm reduction and other kinds of things. And we had safety nets financially. When people go down this road,
sometimes they lose their job, right? And in order to get treatment, sometimes you need money, you need insurance, just that the whole system. Now, I'm giving the parents the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they're horrible, horrible psychopathic human beings. That's also possible. It doesn't sound like that. It's just when I zoom out, I see suffering everywhere. And Madison has suffered greatly. It sounds like Madison has managed to avoid that whole thing. I don't know if it's just inner strength or she was given enough attunement and stability that from even her parents, or she had grandparents, maybe even foster parents for a time, or aunts and uncles, or something gave her the ability to break the pattern. All right, let's adjourn there. So I wanted to give a shout out to some YouTube members. Also, know that if you're a YouTube member, I'm much more likely to see and respond to your comments. I will sort the comments by members first and check those out. Sometimes if it's a comment without any upvotes, it's a lot of scrolling to get to it, and I want to make sure I get to see all the members. But some shout outs to those who have been members for a while now. We're coming up on the 2 corn situation, by the way, meaning that at 2 years of being a member, you're going to have 2 corns instead of just 1. So we got good old Lauren and Rosie and good old Fema and Studerk and Allison and Brittany and MCK and good old Lehu and Tessa and SRM 808 and Cami and others. I'll give a shout out at another time. And thank you so much for becoming a member and staying a member this whole time, especially you, Brittany, because you're at the highest level of, wow, that's amazing. You upgraded 4 months ago, according to this thing. Anyway, so thanks for becoming a member, Brittany, and staying a member for almost 2 years and being the highest tier member. That's really, really, really great of you. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.